I'll tell you, one of the thrust of the seminar series is the IEP for home. And it was recently published. It's available on understood.org, u.org/IEP for home. And did you read the seminar series titles?
Yeah.
So the seminar for next month until the end of the academic year is the IEP for home. And it consists of just all the basic things that a parent needs to be doing for their kid to set them up for a successful school day. That's the one sentence summary of it. So the IEP for home is now a toolkit on understood.org. And what I'm going to be doing is going over in a little bit more detail how the toolkit was set up and why. Because the way that the toolkit works, it's like a self-assessment tool. And you rank it based on certain key observable behaviors that are listed in the document. Good evening. Come on in.
Hello, how are you?
Come on in.
Nice
Yes.
to see you.
You should sit on that side because I'm videotaping myself. It's been a while.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, you're on video now?
So the videotape only catches me and not anybody else. And the reason why I created that whole thing was because I felt that parents were coming to me and not being informed enough about what I can do for them. And part of something that I actually bill time for, I will spend 5 or 10 minutes describing what a developmental pediatrician does. Because especially after a first visit, when I'm doing the feedback, I'll explain, well, this is what I do. And, parents will often ask me, well, how often do I need to come back? And I say, well, it depends, because most answers in developmental pediatrics are, it depends. But it kind of varies from once every 3 years to 4 times a year is kind of a rough guide for how often you need to see a specialist like me. And then I explain to them why, the things that they should be looking for, et cetera. And I realized in having to do that teaching, well, that's standardizable. I mean, I can publish that or I can have seminars on it and sort of make people more savvy about how to access care. So today's seminar was dedicated for school professionals. I'll talk a little bit about school law. Probably a lot of you are already familiar with it. The more circumscribed role of school professionals, which is a little bit different from healthcare professionals. I'll toggle back and forth between the two because my seminar on school professionals makes a bit more sense after you've done the seminar on healthcare professionals, but whatever. Are any questions coming up for you as I'm talking with school professionals? We have a very familiar face, but not everyone knows you in the room. If you just want to quickly introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Tanya. I have an 8-year-old boy in the autism spectrum, and then I have a 3-year-old about to get tested.
Okay, so
and my husband also has
your husband has
autism also.
Oh, really? Okay. I remember when we met last year, I think you expressed surprise by, wow, no one ever told me that you can have your child tested at school and that there are services available there. And I was saying, well, yeah, but, and you have to really understand what the school district can and cannot do. So for a lot of families, the entry point is when the child turns 3. And you approach the school district and they will make you fill out some paper forms and stuff, and they're going to want to know why are you worried? Why are you having your child tested? Even though in the healthcare system you can just say, well, I'm worried, and that's a good enough reason to get you through the door, you're better off coming with a bit more detailed information for your child. So do you have your own way of organizing yourself? I'm just curious how you guys, because all of you have already dealt with schools by now. I just happen to know that. So how do you approach school districts? Do you know what questions you're supposed to ask, or do you just show up for the meeting because you were told to come, or how do you manage it?
Well, with my story, it goes back to when my son was born. He had meningitis at birth, so we were automatically put into early intervention. So we had a lot of practice with early intervention to be able to know what to say or what to look for, and his cognitive development and
okay, good.
all of those things. So then when he graduated, per se, out of early intervention, they said you have to go to the school system and see if he qualifies. And when we tested him, he didn't. But I just knew there was a disconnect between the cognition, like his letter development. It just didn't make sense. It was backwards for him. He couldn't get his name, and his name has 4 letters. And I was like, So I reached out to the public school, and I did write the letter. Like, I called first and said, what do I need to do? And they said, write a letter of what your concerns are.
Good.
And I just wrote basically what my concerns are. I have a little bit of an edge because my background is special education.
Okay.
So I had a little bit more of the language, so I was able to write, cognitive development and letter recognition, worried about how his reading would progress and things like that. So I was able to write a little bit more. But if you can do the research and get the right language out to the school, I think it gives you an edge in a sense, like that you can say,
Good.
I'm worried about the way he's perceiving information, cognition, and all that. So,
Well, you're much more on the inside than some of us.
yeah.
And you can speak to how difficult it is to be customer friendly or not.
Yes, both
when
ends of it, because the caseload gets really high for certain professionals.
Right.
So then it ends up that there's just, you're always trying to catch up to be able to help the student and help the family. Because I work in a public school as well, so you're just, how can I do this? How can I help?
Right.
But then the school that my son is in, I think because I have the background, I'm able to push a little bit more because
Yeah. So there's a bit of the squeaky wheel gets the grease a little bit.
dance
Okay.
kind of thing, and if you keep emailing.
But I think the bottom line is, I think if you ask really good questions, people are going to be compelled to give you an answer, okay? So one thing is, yes, the school is available to do testing. You have a legal right to have your child undergo testing. You're going to get more comprehensive testing, and you're going to get more satisfaction and better answers if you have some good key questions. We can spend part of the seminar today thinking about your own kids if you're about to have them tested and just how do I phrase my questions. It's a little bit hard for me to do that in a seminar. I mean, that takes a little bit of thinking. And then you have to understand the limits of what the testing will do for you. The testing is not the same as in the healthcare system. You're not going to get a diagnostic profile necessarily. They will give you an educational code, and that will give you a rough idea about the kinds of things that your child is likely to need. But the testing is designed to determine eligibility for services. It's not, it can and should be used to figure out what to do for the child. That's absolutely true. But the way the testing is often used, it's really to determine eligibility. It serves both purposes, but you really can't do both well. You should probably just do one or the other in an ideal world, and they have to do both. They have to do testing in order to figure out what to do, but they also have to use the testing to decide whether or not the services are going to be covered by the public system. Then the other piece is that they're only going to really look carefully at how the child's disability, if there's one, affects the child's participation at school, so for the 5 or 6 hours of school. And the amount of information that they're going to take about how your child is performing outside of school is limited. A lot of school districts do that, and some of them even do a home assessment that's a bit more specialized, and it's not something that's done commonly, but it's available. And the school districts that do that often do provide some counseling or some sort of advice about things that could be done in the home. But that's rare. It's not something you want to rely on. And I typically don't recommend it to families because it's not what the schools spend most of their day thinking about. They don't spend most of the day thinking about how is the child performing at home. They really are thinking about how is the child performing at school. And actually, you need them to do that, okay? I think what's quite difficult for pediatricians, and I was a general pediatrician before I became a developmental pediatrician, was to try to imagine, but what does the school need from me? Why are they asking me for this information? They're asking me to give some suggestions, but I really don't know what it is I'm supposed to be suggesting. And so the dilemma goes both ways. Pediatricians don't know what happens during the school day necessarily. If you're interested in it like I am, I spend a lot of time thinking about what goes on during the school day, but that's not what you can normally expect from a pediatrician. And there's a lot of other healthcare providers like neuropsychologists or therapists who are somewhere in between. Some of them really do know quite a lot about what goes on in school, some of them don't. But they kind of are more focused on what happens at home. I think that divide is useful. So that's a bit of chit chat there. Any questions that are coming up from what I just said?
So one thing that I found was interesting, we had something similar. My daughter, who's on an IEP, is the youngest of 4, and we just assumed her delays were related to being the youngest and being busy.
Right.
And we were wrong. And we definitely learned with her, and I think we had good support staff at the school, but something that we always found really interesting was to sit in a meeting and have the school then respond and say, so we think one time a week for 15 minutes is sufficient. And we would always think, well, why not 2 hours? Like, I know that's unreasonable, but
Right.
I've never understood how they figure out the correct quantity of time and the frequency. And when my daughter was 4, it was twice a week for 30 minutes for her speech and language delays. And then the following year when we met again, we realized she's so distracted and now has an ADHD diagnosis, but she was so distracted that they broke it up to 15-minute sections more times. And that had a huge difference, which it's the same amount of time, but broken up in a way that she could
Right.
sort of sustain her focus made a big difference. And we wouldn't have known to ask that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to know how much to say, like, is that the right number?
Okay, well, so one thing is schools do testing. They focus just on what happens during the school day. Any services that are provided are there to help support the child at school. And that's a key distinction. Just because your child has a diagnosis of ADD or whatever given by a pediatrician doesn't mean that that diagnosis is having an impact on the school day. And so they're really going to focus on the school day piece. It's much harder for you and I to figure out what would be appropriate because we don't know the school day as well as they do. So that's just a limitation. The other one is you don't always know what works with kids. And a very common thing that I'll say to families is try to do 6-month blocks of time at a time. Make some decisions about what you think is going to be good for your kid. In 6 months, check and make sure that that was a good decision or not, and then revise. And really start to get comfortable with not knowing what you're doing because you don't. I don't know what I'm doing with the kid. But I will start out with some standard kind of recommendations, and I can certainly share some with you now. Things that come up commonly. It's not going to cover every kid that's in this room. And just feel comfortable with not knowing, but getting to know your child, okay? So we start out with one narrative. My child has language delays or my child has physical delays. I think we're going to need this much service. And then you provide the service, and because progress occurs a little bit slowly, you have to give it a good 6 months before you're going to know if you're on the right track. And then you revise. The healthcare system's a bit more nimble with revising because we can change things from one week to the next if we need to. The schools respond a bit more sluggishly usually because legally speaking it's harder, it's much more cumbersome to change what your plan is. But I think twice a year would be a minimum, especially if you're noticing, hey, that plan that we wrote up at the beginning probably wasn't quite right, we should fine tune it. More commonly, they're going to do the fine tuning once a year. So the fact that you didn't know in advance that 15-minute sessions would be way better for your daughter, that's trial and error. Now, I think any seasoned speech therapist would figure that out after 4 to 6 sessions and say, well, maybe I should do this differently. Does that help?
That is.
Okay. Other questions that come up related to school? It's usually considered to be a bit of a black box. Everyone's a little bit mystified, like what's going on there? Go ahead.
So my thing is where you know as a parent, because you're a teacher, because you've been through this, I mean, the experience, and they're telling you, we know what works.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, I know what works. I taught my child, like, I know this, this, and this. Like, for example, her, like, if I would have gone and, no, that's not going to work, this is going to work, let's try it for 6 weeks. And you're just setting my kid up to fail. And you know, instead of helping him, you know, be, like, actually do something properly, you're helping them regress.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always been my issue, that I had to get an advocate. And I'm going through the same thing with my little one. They've had the written portion, you know, that I fill out, and he was off the charts under autism and ADHD. They saw him for 20 minutes, less than 20 minutes. So he has a separation anxiety. So he tried his best to just hurry up and go to his mom. So he was like hopped up and sure, and we're ready to go, and okay, his limit is 15 minutes. And I know that, and they're like, he was a wonderful kid, we don't know what you're talking about, this paper, you know, you said this, you know, there was, and I had the EI with me, you know, the person, and she had seen him for maybe a month, you know, 45-minute sessions, and she was like, well, I just think he's excited, and she didn't help me at all, not like my therapist that I, you know, pay every you know, time. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not appealing this. So they gave him a developmental delay based on my paperwork. I mean, they fought it with me. Like they literally made me think like I'm crazy. And I'm like, I know what I'm talking about. And I was like, I'm not appealing this. I will go get them tested. We'll see you in a year, because
This was when your child was 3. Is that right?
He turned 3 in July. So he was tested, right when the school year started, and they were just like, no. And I mean,
so this is really painful, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're not. But the same is true in the healthcare side. So it's pretty rare now. I've been in this practice for many, many years, and people are not dissatisfied with my evaluations anymore. But I always ask, am I seeing your child? Is my child behaving with me the same way that they're going to be behaving with you, especially for behavior, but even for things like language skills, which shouldn't really vary that much across settings. If a child's uncomfortable with me, I'm not going to get the same amount of information. And then some kids are really comfortable with me, and I'm getting really good information. Right. It can go both ways. What matters more, though, is how is the child performing in context, because my therapeutic recommendations depend on that. Now, the dilemma with the school is, if that child is performing well in their context, they're going to provide whatever services make sense in their context, okay? And he might really be behaving differently in your context, and he might need a different approach. So that's a tricky one. And the school's not really required and necessarily invested in finding out how he's performing in your context until such time as it starts to affect their context.
Right.
So that's just a structural dilemma. And in those situations, maybe his behaviors really are different at home than at school. I don't know. I mean, if they only tested him for 15 minutes, it seems a bit short, actually. I don't know how you would do anything of meaningfulness that's less than an hour.
Well, that was my thing. And both of my kiddos, behavioral and socially, are what impact, because academically, they're
ahead of the game.
But I'm the one-on-one, like homeschooling them, and then the other one has the actual diagnosis and everything, but since they never had them in their school system, they're like, we need to throw them in mainstream and let them sink or float, and then, then we'll figure it out. And as a parent, I'm like,
yeah, don't do that,
what are you
right?
doing?
Yeah.
Everything I've worked for and all the therapies, and then you're just going to throw them in there.
Right.
And they're like, oh, we'll reevaluate in 6 months. I'm like, oh, no, you're
Yeah,
not.
right. Well, it's complicated because you really do know your child best in the context in which your child lives with you. But you really don't know what your child's going to do in the school until they've been in school for a day or for a week or for a month or something. Even in my own practice, again, it doesn't really happen to me anymore because I have a way of finding out from the parents what's the thing that's going to scare you the most about today's visit, because who really wants to see me anyways? I mean, it's the truth. Like, who really wants to see a guy like me? Like, nobody, right? But I'm always going to ask, so, is there anything that I should know about how your child performs, maybe with me or outside the home? I want to make them feel more reassured that it could be different with me, but I get it that it can be different from home, and we're going to have a conversation about it if it's really, really different. The amount of time that a school professional spends on that might be lower. That's possible. But they do kind of need to do their job on their turf, their way, and sometimes that means doing things that aren't going to work, that you knew weren't going to work, and that's painful. Right? It's very painful to see that your kid go through that. Definitely share the information so that they have it, and it could really help with your alliance when they realize that you have some important strategies to share. I would love it to go both ways, because they might discover some things that work that you didn't think of.
Right.
And you would want to know what those are too. So it's dialoguing, it's relationship building, it's building trust with people. Sometimes that goes quickly, sometimes it doesn't. Definitely make that your vision. I'm going to trust you guys and to do well. And sort of like what Reagan said, trust but verify. And I think that's the best.
I didn't, because I knew.
You didn't.
I didn't trust them, and I fought it for 6 months, and he was homeschooled until like 1, and then he got the, he's in the inclusion program, and they're like, thank you, like he's in a different school and everything, and they're like, that was the best thing for him. I'm like, yeah, I know. I mean, he has like reports from his learning centers, Christian schools from since he was little. That's how he was. The other one's the same case.
Well, but that's confusing.
Why are they taking the learning center, the Christian schools? Like, why aren't they taking all that paperwork? You know, they're like, well, because it's not a public school, we can't, you know, they're not trained, they don't
Yeah,
know what they're
that's,
doing.
yeah, no, that actually isn't true, and actually I'm disappointed to hear that. So if your child is in a private preschool somewhere, that should be really valuable information for them, and they should really accept it as such, because it's, quote, not biased.
Right?
And they're seeing the child, someone, a professional, presumably, is seeing the child in a setting that's similar to school, and they should be using the data. So that's disappointing if that's what happened. That shouldn't happen. What are some other experiences that you've had with schools?
My son actually he went through an evaluation and it ended up being he had a neuropsych evaluation, and then he ended up personally at a therapist that I found.
Right.
And he also had his evaluation at school, and the timing ended up being at the same time. So that was kind of crazy. But the neuropsych evaluation was like a 1-day thing, 5 hours.
Right.
Of course,
And-
he did very well with the therapist.
And how old was he at the time of the testing?
Just about to turn 6.
Okay.
Which made me a little bit nervous too, because I thought the school should finish theirs because theirs was taking a couple months. And then I thought about rescheduling the other one just because he would have been tested slightly different at 6.
Mhm.
But we went ahead with it, and she still took that into consideration, the neuropsych. And so they did very well working together and trying to cross-reference the many different tests that they did. But so after the neuropsych's evaluation, I have to tell you, my school district does a fantastic job. They did push back on me during the evaluation. I did get pushed back though, to take it back a little bit in the beginning of the year. Oh, no, he's fine. Just wait until 1st grade. I'm so glad I didn't do that. And I'm in Linfield. Linfield is it's an awesome school district, but it was kind of shocking looking back because I was screaming for help. I've been asking for help for my son for, as you know the story, for years. And, we moved here and we were in the right pediatrician. At first my pediatrician was like, let's wait a little bit. So, she was worked very closely with me, but once she heard how the beginning of the school year went, she was like, okay, you know what, let's do it. And then she recommended coming to you and all that. But so it's about having that balance too, like the pediatrician, the school, it just all kind of fell into place. But I will say after the evaluation moving forward into the year, because that happened in October, November, where the pediatrician said, you know what, Val, get him evaluated through the school.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to push the school because the pediatrician I wanted to do it and the school didn't want to do it at first. They didn't push back a lot. They just, they recommended to wait because of his age, because he was too young, they said.
But he was already,
He was 5. He was 5.5.
okay.
He was
That,
5.5.
yeah, again, that doesn't add up for me. I don't know
He was
whether.
5.5, and he was he was on charts. They had him on a plan from day 2, 3 in school, and they're such a good school system, they didn't even tell us about it until like a week or 2 in.
Mm-hmm.
He was getting phone calls and letters from other parents, phone calls to the principal. It was very tough. So fast forward to finally, getting this evaluation started, which it began in January, and he's in special ed now. The thing is I see that dynamic, and just hearing what you had to say really makes me understand it a lot more. So basically, after his neuropsych evaluation, she highly recommended a bunch of different things, and one of them that the school didn't take on was the OT, the occupational therapy.
Uh-huh.
So, so the school says that he needs like his special ed, like the other things that they agreed with, but they just said they're not going to have him meet with the occupational therapist weekly or for a scheduled time. However, even though the neuropsych wanted to do that, they said, however, we have the occupational therapist looking in on him,
Right.
and recommending
Right.
sensory things like breaks
Yeah.
or whatever that is. So now, now starting in the beginning of this year, I haven't had an evaluate or a meeting at all with the school yet, but there's a new pediatrician, a new special ed teacher who actually knows you very well. She came from developmental or behavioral pediatrics.
Okay.
She has experience in that. So she's working with kids like that. So she's going to look out for some ways to work with
But
kids.
what are
That's
some
pretty cool.
what are some things you can share, or I don't know, any experience you had about your communicating with the school district? Was there something that you learned from that you said, okay, now I know how to work with you guys better? Just for the other people in the group to hear.
You get all the paperwork, they propose the plan to you. I mean, obviously, you should be able to reach out and, ask if there's any questions or things like that. And if you do want to, add something in, or tweak something, or, I don't think my child's getting enough of this, but it's hard to know like how many times of
Of therapy you need, yeah.
How many days they're supposed
Right.
to get, or
Right.
whatnot, or if that's good for them and what they're getting,
Right.
what they're meeting on is good. So it's difficult. I would say we have to ask for more meetings with the school.
Well, so let me take it to the next level. So that's a super common question, is that a family will come to see me and they will say, how many hours of service do I need, or do I need more services, right? And it's actually putting the cart before the horse. You really want to know your child inside out.
Depending where your child is at. I mean, it depends on the severity.
Or the type of disability that they're
so
comfortable
type of
with.
needs.
Yeah.
The thing that strikes me, and it's so difficult, is because my 6-year-old just happened to go to a private school for his 3-year preschool. When he was 3.5, he went to a private school, and he was okay that year because it was a smaller class.
Uh-huh.
You know, he was definitely one of the more difficult children there. And even just getting to go was difficult, but that's a different story. But you know, it's being in that school system. If he was in a public school, I realized this coming here last year, that he would not be evaluated.
Yeah.
Because I was asking the pediatrician at the time, which said there was nothing to do. So I had nothing, because the school said nothing, and then they started having issues with him at 4.5 years old.
This was a private school.
Mhm,
Yeah.
private school.
Yeah.
So then he had went to two private schools because we moved, and the second one was much better. The
Mhm.
approach to the way when it's
Right, yeah. But it's highly variable, and it is a dilemma. So the private schools will do as much special education as they feel like doing. There's no legal mandate for them to do more. And typically I'll recommend to parents, have your child evaluated in a public school and try it out first. Public schools are legally required to take care of all comers. As a result, they develop expertise in the area. They actually have the experience, right? They have all the difficult kids in their classrooms. They have to figure out how to make it work, and so they do. And that's just not always true for a private school. What's more common for a private school that does offer special education services is, maybe some executive skills support or maybe some language supports, but they're going to select what they feel comfortable offering, and anyone who can't benefit from it is going to be asked to leave, or is just not going to have a very good educational experience. So I definitely always put a plug for the public school first. The exception is there are some private schools that are specifically designed for special education, and that's a different ballgame again. And usually those students are tuitioned in by the public school.
One thing I didn't know that I learned through the IEP process was that you can call an IEP meeting at any time. And I thought that was cool, because I was like, God, that was a new realm for me. And once I found Birch Meadow in Reading, I was like, it was amazing, and everybody there they're just all amazing. And what I've done since my little one's been small, because I've always taught where he's gone to school, is the communication with the teacher is vital, because they might be doing that, say 30 minutes in her case, for two times a week, but if you know exactly what they're doing at school and you're doing it at home, you were able to gauge and change that. And that's how I knew my children, because the whole trial and error, I knew and I had it down. So I knew what worked and what didn't work in a big setting with 10 or 15 kids versus a 1-to, ratio. So I had already tested all of this, and I guess I was upset because I'm handing you this everything in a golden platter, it's already been reviewed and tested. I promise it will work. And so in my experience, going back and forth with the teachers, even now, my child, one of the things, he forgets everything. He'll forget his backpack, his lunchbox, sometimes.
Right.
Where's your shoe at? I'm talking about his shoe. So, email the teacher. I think a going home checklist would be great, and so we going hand in hand, going back and forth, and knowing those things, and then he comes home and works on those executive functioning skills and everything, because his are not academic. It'll affect academic if we don't get these social
Right. But but the lesson that you learned was really good communication with the teacher is key. And when you share strategies and when you're implementing the same strategies in both home and school, probably everybody learns a bit faster, including your child, right?
Yes.
And I think it's a terrific way to invest energy and resources, because I think that's almost as good as adding another 2 or 3 sessions of some other therapy per week. Just what you did there, okay?
The advancement and improvement on the child is incredible, doing it the way I did it, and then I end up learning so many
Also-
more skills, not just
also
teaching.
true.
I'm like special ed.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah.
wealth of information.
But how easy or difficult was it to share strategies? So there, like a more commonplace example is when you're teaching your kid or teaching your spouse how you would like to have the kitchen cleaned or how you would like to bake a cake. And they have different ideas about it and they don't want to be told what to do. And just think how much more personal it is when it's your kid. Right? But everyone who has a relationship with your kid has to kind of figure out how it's going to work for them. So there's this uncomfortable learning curve that I think you are going to go through as your child is handed over to other adults. And you have to take a really deep breath and swallow hard and let them, to build their own relationship with your child and then see if it works. And the question is more, how quickly are you going to check up to see whether it's working or not, and how much time do you give? And that's an uncomfortable
I
place.
always say 6 weeks. Like
Yeah.
for my personal children, every child is different. 3 weeks, 6 weeks, depending the situation, could be up to 3 months to see any progress. Depending.
Right. Can
I
take
know
a while.
for me,
Yeah.
like 6 weeks, if I know he's still doing the same thing at home, I question are we still doing this at school, or do we still have this program, in place? Because I'm seeing regression or I'm seeing this, and having that ability to just call in a meeting if something is really off, it's so awesome to be like,
Yeah,
okay, we need to
yeah.
revisit
Yeah.
what's happening here.
Right.
Or vice versa. They can, bring me in and say, Mrs. Graves, we had what's going on at home, and just the communication, because the little one was disturbing the 8-year-old. He was viciously biting him, and I was calling doctors, insurance. I'm like, I need to get in. I don't know what to do. I'm ready to put chili in this kid's mouth. What do I do? I'm ready to go to alternative methods, because here I'm doing all the APA stuff. And I'm like, I need help. It's affecting his school, So the teachers were like, oh, this makes a lot of sense of how he's acting with the other children, because he was lashing out at the other children because he was being bullied at home.
Right.
We're going
Right. But that's it. That's so okay. But what you're So what you're highlighting there is just how important it can sometimes be, even though you work in a classroom setting, how important it is for you to know a little bit about what's going on at home. That kind of stuff does come to the surface as you build your relationship and as you become more trusting. And I think that I think it's really difficult for a lot of school professionals to talk about what's going on at home, even though they might like to do so. Ergo, they sometimes hire people like me to do that work for them, because I'm kind of more of a neutral party. But that's not a problem if you have a relationship. So I really wanted to go both ways. So I'm really glad that you've had those experiences. It's because it really helps your kid. And I'm also glad that you also reminded us about your right to ask for an IEP meeting when needed. And again, I don't want you to use legal mechanisms to solve social problems, but it's a great fallback mechanism when you need it. Right? And so I'm glad that you brought that
Does
up.
have to be in writing that you requested, or how is it that you request?
Call or email.
Well, they told me I could just call them.
Just call.
They
Mhm.
said it had to be the written one has to be the initial one, from my understanding, and then the other ones you just
Yeah.
call up the chair and
Yeah.
say.
It's time for a meeting, we need to get together.
Yeah.
You call or you email.
I mean, the way that I've been taught is always email, because you have a paper trail. I called this day. I emailed this day. And so you have it.
You
And
can also ask for meetings in your IEP. So last year when we had my son's 3-year reevaluation, I asked that we have a monthly meeting. And I asked for it to be in the IEP, and I said I wanted parent consults as well, because we had a behaviorist on our case too. And the school was like, okay, yep, you can call and arrange that, whatever you want to do. They gave you a set amount of hours, but what really worked was just constant communication, openness, honesty, and knowing where they should be developmentally. So my son he's in 3rd grade now, and he had the reading delay, and I said, it's going to change from learning to read to reading to learn, and he's already behind. How are we, I used we, going to
Nice
get
work,
it
yeah.
that we're on
Yeah.
the same page, and he's at a level that the frustration isn't making all these behaviors happen because he can't read. So how are we going, what can I do at home? What can you do? And
Yeah.
we did all this testing, but I think it was the collaboration, I wasn't pointing fingers, even though sometimes I was like, you need to do something. Like, he needs
Right,
time
right,
because
right,
we keep
right.
saying give him time.
Right.
And at one of the meetings, I said, we have given him time. Like, we're now heading into second grade, and he's in kindergarten level. So how can we help? Like, what can we do? And that seemed to work well with my team.
Well, but how, you see, this is lovely example of really effective communication. This is where I feel very, very badly for what parents are being put through. You have this very collaborative tone.
Yeah.
You talked about your child's growth. Where are we taking my child? So you really focus on the thing that everybody cares about. You took yourself out of it. You took the other adults out of it. So how are we all going to work together? And this is about your most prized possession in your life, right? So it's but it's a very, very charged topic, and there you are having to be collaborative and friendly and polite and follow procedures and all this kind of thing. So again, if you can pull it off, please try.
Yeah.
But I don't hold you accountable for, all of your temper tantrums. You're totally allowed to have a few meltdowns along the way. And I think you kind of have to have them in order to just pick yourself up and stand up on your feet again. So you don't want to have to go through that, but I also don't hold you as parents responsible for being kind and collaborative. But do it as much as you can, because it's going to pay off some dividends for your child. Okay.
It did help. I mean, I thought it helped. And
I think that they look to you, I mean, first of all, your kids are very lucky because you're in education, both of you.
Mhm.
So you have that way to effectively communicate with them.
Right.
I do have to say,
Always.
well, it's tough. It's a tough crossword, but going back to my son's first, parent-teacher conference for 15 minutes, the teacher did care. She was like, we need more time. Can you come back in 2 hours? And I was like, by myself, and I actually was able to bring my husband back at the time and get some coverage for the kids last minute, and it was great. And we sat with her. So basically I had an hour and a half meeting. She actually cared about what was happening.
But they do. They do.
If you want.
Yeah.
And she said, I have to tell you that you're extremely receptive to the issues that I'm having and how I work with him on the plan that she has in place. Because she said she's had difficulty with a lot of other parents pushing back, saying, my kid's fine, why are you?
right.
It's hard. It's hard.
It's tough.
Yeah. I'll share a little anecdote, that problem of the school professional trying to give feedback to the family. So one of the things that I also do from time to time is I talk with pediatricians. And it's come up on more than one occasion where the pediatricians are asking me, well, how do I talk with a family that doesn't want to send their child to the school or for early intervention? And I said, that's a great question, because I never run into that, right? Because the kids that come to see me, the parents have already decided that there's a problem that they want help with. And so it's hard. Those are really hard conversations to have, to say your child is not doing well, and I'd like to meet with you to discuss it. So I'm glad that your teacher is making those attempts. The families will eventually come around, but any feedback you get from a teacher or from a school principal that you don't have a relationship with feels blaming and toxic a lot of the time. And it's not because it's intended that way. I think that schools could do a bit better making sure that when they share feedback that they're explaining why, and that they're also telling you what they're doing about it. And they're saying to you, this is just for your information, or they're saying, can you help us out? But to be really clear. And the number of times that I've had families come to me really, really upset because they were told about something that wasn't going well at the school. And I always ask them this, because I always want to know what the answer is. But what are you supposed to do? Do you know what you're supposed to do? Did the school team say what they're going to do? And they always feel like they're on the hook, and they have to fix this problem that occurred at school, which they don't necessarily understand, right? And so I think it's just important to ask. Thank you for sharing. Can you let me know if you need me to act on this information, or are you just letting me know because you're letting me know? And can you tell me what you're going to do about this problem? I think those are relatively neutral questions, and I think it's important to get clarity on that.
Do the schools, I would assume so, but not quotas, but it just seemed to me through the process that they were just we can't have another child in special ed right now. If we add another one, it's gonna put us to open another classroom or whatever. I mean, they push so hard with both of my children to say, no, let's do this way because,
It's better for us.
it just seemed like they just, since they had revamped the whole system and they had gone through all that, bad stuff, that they just didn't have room or something, and they just were trying to buy time until I put my foot down and I'm like, you know what? I love you, but I don't like you. You don't know my child, and I don't like the fact that you say you went and saw him for 2 minutes and you think he's okay. Those are the wording, like you're a chair, but you have no great, customer service skills, and so it's like you're upsetting me, and I always have someone with me to calm me down because it is very personal.
It's very personal, yeah.
Up, like, why would I come up here and make up that I need help with my child because he wants to be in a a Christian school, but he can't be there. He doesn't want to be homeschooled because he's a social butterfly. So public school is the next thing. Why are you fighting? It's like, why aren't you working with me? And it just seems like there's pushback, and I'm not the only one. I have like a row full of friends that they keep pushing, like, oh no, he doesn't need language, speech,
right.
His pragmatic, blah, blah, blah. And then until the child is like, versed, like for speech, they told me we're not giving them that. That's not on the IEP, that's final type of thing. And I'm like, fine. Will you see him every month at least? So I'm working with him at home and doing my thing.
Yeah.
So now he's on it. Now it's on the IEP because they're like, okay, we messed up.
Okay. Well, but what you're talking about, it's a very, very common experience, what you're describing. Either there's a perception that your child's being short-shrifted, or actually your child's being short-shrifted, right?
Does that happen a lot though?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes it's perception and sometimes it's reality. But the dilemma that schools have to deal with that the healthcare system doesn't deal with is that they have to both decide who gets services and allocate the resources. Because they have to distribute the resources that they have for the 500 kids in that school or for the 8,000 kids in that district or whatever. I don't know if you've ever had to work with insurance companies, but they find some very clever ways to not pay for the services because in the end there is only a finite number of dollars. The schools have never been given enough money to do what the law tells them that they're supposed to do. The federal law has never funded them at the full capacity that they were supposed to be funded at. And so it depends, the amount of money that they have available depends much more on local taxes than it does on federal monies, and the resources are variable depending by the town. So again, as a parent, you can never let that get in your way. You always have to do what you think is right for your child. You're not going to be able to sleep at night if you don't give it your all. But the truth is that there are resource allocation decisions that are very real and that are very important and that have a big impact on some kids. And sometimes it's because they really only have room for 8 kids in that language-based classroom and you are going to be the 9th, and it's just not humanly possible for the teacher to take on another case, and that's just, you're not even going to necessarily get right, but you might not even get a particularly good education even if you did succeed in getting into the program, right? And they can work with you and they can work over time to expand programs and to hire new staff, but that all takes time. That happens over the course of a school year that you can start to shift the programming for next year, et cetera. So I feel I do have that sense too of how much schools would like to do more, but the systems just constrain them. Especially, I was working in New Hampshire for many years, and I remember having a private conversation with the assistant superintendent who didn't want all the kids with autism to be placed out of district, but there were a whole bunch of pressures within her school district that were preventing her from building the program that she really wanted to build. And I was thinking, wow, that's kind of a reverse of what I would expected. But you see that they really do want to expand their programs and they can't because there's institutional pressure. Sometimes it's the parents in the school district themselves are voting on what the money's going to be spent on, and it's a lot of tensions and pressures. So individual kids do get lost, but hopefully most of them are going to get something reasonable. Again, don't let that prevent you from pulling at all the stops and doing your all for your kid. You have to do that because you're just not going to sleep at night if you don't. But I think it's good to have a little sprinkle of realism as well. So.
Kids that attend private school, can they get any sort of services from the public school system? I know it wouldn't be like in your typical setup of like going to class, here's a half hour, and then you're back to class. But like, is there a way that?
Yeah. So you're asking about whether public schools are required to provide service to students that don't attend the public school but go elsewhere. The answer is yes. I think legally they're only required to provide the service in their public school building. So you have to.
Drive them over.
Yeah.
You can schedule it so that the child gets the therapy right at the beginning of the day or right at the end of the day, and you can finagle it. And they are absolutely required, and they're willing to do that too. Yeah.
The preschool that I work at, so I work at a preschool in a public school, and we've had students that still attend a private school in town, but they don't want to come to our integrated preschool, so they come to our preschool and get the services, and then we have a liaison that goes out and observes like once a month and checks in and kind of collaborates to make sure that what they're doing in services in our house matches kind of what they're doing in their private preschool house. So kind of like, yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting how the legal requirements do kind of map onto services. I try to sidestep the legal issue a little bit because I'm really just interested in kids and how do we get them to grow and learn. And I think you sometimes lose sight of that if you're focused on the law, but you actually do need to know the law too. That's one thing that's really well covered. Kathy and I were talking about this at the beginning of the meeting. Something that you can get pretty easily is good information about special education law. There's lots of workshops and like the Federation for Children with Special Needs has workshops like multiple times a week on this stuff, and it's probably much more accurate than, I think I know the basics really well, but it's probably much richer. And I think that's great, but sometimes it's not about the law. Sometimes it's about relationship building, and it's about knowing how to share behavioral observations and knowing how to describe my child's language skills or my child's social skills, because then you really get people interested and wondering and intrigued about how can I help this child grow and learn. So I always want to bring you back to that if at all possible, but you're absolutely right. You need to know a little bit about the law too. Okay. We've used up the time. Are there any other questions that you want to ask? I can stay for a couple more minutes, but it's kind of a large open field. Yeah, go ahead.
How do you decide when an accommodation plan should move more to an IEP? If you've been on an accommodation plan, you feel like it's kind of okay, but it's not, the grades just kind of.
Well, it boils down to effective progress. And how do you define it and how do you measure it? So how do you feel confident that your child is making progress? And you have to decide which domain. Accommodation plans are often done around executive skills. An accommodation, just as a little aside here, an accommodation is not about progress, okay? An accommodation is reducing demands so that you can participate, okay? Maybe make progress in another domain. So let's say you're accommodating for a child's short attention span and therefore they're able to write better essays. Okay, so there should be some sort of a bonus there, but you're not improving the child's attention span by accommodating around it. But sometimes that's all you have available. So a more classic example is a vision, hearing, or motor impaired student. You can only have an accommodation. Okay, if you can't see, you have to accommodate. The child's not going to see because of your accommodations. There's no IEP that's ever going to correct a vision impairment, right? So those are what I would call true accommodations. You're reconstructing the program around the child so that they can then develop their other skills. When you say that a child is not making progress on an accommodation plan, you got to make sure, well, if it's cerebral palsy, it's probably not going to change, right? But if it's executive skills or language skills, it could change. In general, you want to see the child participating more fully and growing and learning in other domains. And if they're not, then yeah, I think it would be important to look at the IEP concept. Again, it's always you're juggling between a benefit and a loss. The less time you spend in general education, the less time you have to practice those skills that you need to be using in general education. So how do you find the right balance? Effective progress is really thorny, and it's very, very under-described we need to spend much more time thinking about how can we all feel comfortable that this child is making progress. If you have that question answered, you're not going to care about a whole lot of other stuff. Because that's really all we all want, is to see children grow and learn, right? So that's where the rubber hits the road. And I would invite all of us to spend a lot more time in that space. We spend a lot of time futzing over test scores and service delivery, right? And we should be talking a lot more about, is this child growing and learning? And finding good ways to talk about that. It's important.
I just have a quick, ICCD is where we're gonna get the evaluation. I haven't ever heard anything good or bad about them, so we're still on the list to go see you. So once I get this eval from them, will it be easier for once we see you? Will the process be a bit easier?
So in general, when I have more information, my job is better. I do a better job. So in general, I welcome more neuropsychological information or whatever. There is a ceiling that you're going to reach. I mean, it's not limitless. Sometimes I get inundated with more information than I think is actually going to make a difference. But no, in general, I like to have more information and not less.
And if there's something wrong in the eval that you might get, like, take and say, like, oh, he doesn't, like, have this, or he might have this, are you able to change that?
Yeah, because I'm going to deliver my own opinion about what I think is going on. Okay? This is one of those wobbly things that I also try to provide a lot of information about. Just because my opinion is different doesn't mean that I'm right or wrong, but I do want to start a baseline about where are we going with this kid, and what are the things that we need to be working on, and how are we going to make sure that the kid's actually making progress. It happens to me not super often, but definitely often enough that I have to talk about it, that I change my diagnostic impressions 1 year later or 3 years later. Absolutely. And if I weren't honest about that, I wouldn't be doing a good job, right? So I often tell parents I'm about 90% accurate. Sometimes I say 70% because I'm not so sure about a certain kid, right? But I kind of put that out there because I don't want you to hang your hat on the diagnosis. I want you to hang your hat on skills building. How do I keep this process moving forward? If I have a certain diagnosis, is it going to help me to figure out what things my child needs to work on? And then how do I make sure that my child is moving forward? The big one that comes up all the time is yes or no, does this child have autism? And I spend a lot of time talking about that, and I regret it because sometimes it actually isn't what matters. But the insurance companies and the school districts and the parents kind of make it matter into something, and I feel like we're spending too much time trying to categorize the child, and we're not spending enough time trying to see whether the child is growing and learning. So it's a dilemma. These are thorny questions.
Well, every case and every child is so different. Right?
Well, they are, but there's really a lot of predictable patterns. I mean, in the end, how do you learn language? You learn the sounds, you learn the words, you learn the sentence, you learn the paragraph. So there's a lot of trajectories that I think are common across children. Spoiler alert, I probably should take this off the videotape. I've published a book, it's coming out this month, and it's all about this stuff. It's about the domains of development and how do you start to track the behaviors, what do you call them, and how do you start to look at the progress.
What is it called?
So it's called Essential Skills for Struggling Learners, a framework for student support teams. And it's coming out, actually the first hardcover arrived at the publisher today, so I'm going to get a copy sent to me like in a week or something. It's like hot off the press. So I don't know when I'm going to have the book launched, but at some point I'll have a book
And
launched.
all of that or whatever, because my husband likes to listen to them, not to.
It's a great question. As far as I know, it's just a paper book, but I don't even know that for sure. It's with Brooks. You'll see it if you look on their website. You'll see it. So, yeah. So that's not part of this seminar series. I want to make it into seminar series, but that's really intense. It's written for school teams and it's very comprehensive. So you might find that a bit overwhelming, but you don't have to read the whole book cover to cover. You can just read the chapters that are.
What I do like, because we just had our appointment with, like recently, like last week or the week before. What I like is that you're focusing on my son as a whole child, like the eating habits, the sleeping habits. Do you have fun as a family? Like the questions that you asked. I don't know. To me, it was like, where is Sean going to go, and how are we going to get him there and keep him whole, and not have all this sporadic behavior, but have some. And it's growth. Like it was growing, and it was the whole child. It's the school. It's home. It's him. Like to me, I was very impressed.
Oh, good, I'm
with
glad,
our
yeah.
meeting, the information that you shared with me, and then that IEP for home, and just as an educator, as a mom, and as someone like going through all of this, it just kind of is putting things into perspective, like all the work we've done to get here, and then talking to you, I'm like, oh, it's gonna come together, and he's gonna be okay.
Mm,
He's him, and
I think it's important,
it's so
yeah.
important. But I like that it was the whole child, our whole family, and like how
Cool.
we can help Sean. So
I'm
thank you.
gonna quote, you're on tape, right? So I'm gonna quote you on that
You definitely
one.
quote me on that because
Okay.
I am very impressed
All
with
right,
the fact that
good.
it was worth the wait.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Last year we had a social worker and a facilitator, and I was allowed to kind of graciously back out and leave you guys to talk. And we don't have that resource this year. They're looking to find a replacement. Christine moved on to another practice, but you're welcome to stay. I need to shut the room off. Actually, I don't even need to shut the room off, but whatever. I want
I'm
to.
also still waiting on the list, but that's good, or chases.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
1 year.
But thanks for coming. I look forward to seeing you next month.
Yeah,
Okay?
no, thank you.
I didn't